So this is Ryan. I'm a librarian in the North Carolina room at Pack Library, and I'm here today with Joe Newman, a board member of the Friends of the North Carolina room, and we're going to be talking with John Penley and his father,
James Etheridge Penley.
Thank
James
you.
E. Penley.
And we are in their home at 70 Longview, and Mr. Penley was principal at Fletcher.
Assistant principal at Hall Fletcher, principal at both, I think they called it South French Broad, but it was basically Stevens Lee the year before they integrated the schools. And in the end of his career, he was assistant superintendent of schools for the whole city of Asheville.
So South French Broad was the school that black students went to when Stevens Lee closed.
Yeah, that one year it was called South French Broad. Then they moved it to the middle school and called the middle school South French Broad.
Okay.
But he was principal of that school and then principal of the middle school. And he was actually principal of the middle school when Asheville High had the riot.
Okay, and what year did you retire?
He can't remember, and I can't either. I don't think. You know, I'd say it was around 65, 75, maybe 23 years ago or something like that. 22, 23 years ago.
Okay. And this is your picture again of, whoa,
Yes,
That's his Marine Corps graduation
That's
picture.
the Marine Corps.
Marine Corps, and you were in the Korean War?
Good looking fella. isn't he?
Yeah, it's very handsome.
He was a tank driver for the Marine Corps. When he got out of the Marines, he married my mom when I was about 3 years old, and he adopted me. I'm not his biological son. He went to Western Carolina on the GI Bill. That's my first kind of memories. We were living in an old beat-up housing with no hot shower at Western Carolina while he was getting his college degree. And my mother was doing what she did many years. She was secretary for the president of the college at Western Carolina. And we were very poor. I remember that very clearly. We were really, really poor. My grandmother, who was teaching, helped us out a lot. So
That's your mother's mother.
my mother's mother. His history with his family is not that great. His father had alcohol problems. He ended up being kind of raised by somebody that was pretty well known, Burnside Clemens, who was an Asheville legendary figure because he was kind of a gangster, but he also had a truck stop down on the river, Clemens Truck Stop. And his son, Harold Clemens, who's in the picture up there on the wall with my dad, was my dad's best friend. So they took my dad in and kind of raised him, adopted him. So that's kind of, you know, but my memories are of them going to school. And my memories always of him have been, not only was he either going to school or teaching, but he had a whole number of jobs on the side to support his family. And my mom worked the whole time too. You know, he out there he worked in a bowling alley setting pins. He worked at a gas station, and he went to school. And my mom worked, and they hired a lady from the mountains to come and watch us kids during the day. Even when he was at Hall Fletcher, he started, Mr. Griffin gave him a job teaching down at Hall Fletcher, and then within a couple of years they made him assistant principal down there. And even when he was assistant principal at Hall Fletcher, he coached 2 sports, down there, football and baseball. So most people called him Coach Penley back then. Some people call him some other things, but I won't say that, what it is. And he had, he did the books for Mr. Clemens Truck Stop. And he refereed sports games for other schools on the weekends. So, I hardly saw him. I didn't see him. I saw him more at school than I did here at home.
Right. That would
And
make sense.
so he had to really scramble all his life because they didn't pay teachers that much money back then, you know. So.
And your grandparents in Weaverville, could you say their names?
Yes, my granddaddy was named Jacob Emanuel Beauregard Hauser. He was named after every Confederate general they could think of. Everybody called him Jeb. And my grandmother was Pantha Vashti Hauser.
Wow.
And before that, she was Pantha Vashti Harrelson. And my mother had the same name. They gave my mother the same name as my grandmother, Pantha Vashti Penley, it became. And, you know, my mom also, like I say, the Asheville Citizen-Times had a picture of me with my Asheville High graduation stuff on, and my mom with her UNCA graduation stuff on, because we graduated within a month of each other.
And what year was that?
That was 69-70, and that's when, you know, my mom graduated with honors from UNCA, and
Wonderful.
she was still working as a secretary for the Asheville City School, taking care of her family and going to school at night. I mean, they really worked very hard, and all of it, I think, was really good for the city of Asheville.
Mm-hmm. And so did she teach after she graduated from UNC?
20 years after she graduated, she taught
Oh,
down at Hall Fletcher. She's very, was very concerned about the poor kids down at Hall Fletcher. I wasn't a year where my mom would, you know, for months before the holidays, start buying stuff to give the kids. And she did that twice a year. I know she'd spend a lot of money, and she'd have a whole room full of stuff. And at Christmas and right before they left school, she'd give kids clothes, books, you know, just really nice little things. She really did care about the kids. She taught math, and so did he, actually. I'm terrible at math. It was really, you know, fun.
You didn't take their classes, huh?
They both taught math, and I was really bad at math. But I'll be honest with you, the only thing I cared about going to school was playing football.
Oh, yeah.
That was my thing, you know.
Had you played at Hall,
I was co-captain of the defensive team at Hall Fletcher.
okay.
And it was hard for me because, look, he was in charge of corporal punishment. Back then, it was not only illegal, but it was encouraged. You know, I can tell you the number of times I've run into people in a bar or something, and they ask who I am, they find out who I am, they go, you know, your daddy spanked me, and back in blah, 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 they remember the exact thing. You know, they might not remember anything about what happened when they went to school very much, but they remember the name, and they usually don't take it badly. They usually buy me a drink and go, you know something, I deserved it, and you know.
Did you go to school for a while at South French Broad?
I never went to South French Broad.
Okay, so you went directly from Hall Fletcher to Asheville High.
To Asheville High.
First year it was integrated.
Well, no, that didn't happen until the last year. My senior year at Asheville High, it was integrated.
Okay.
So I went there for, 3 years before the integration. The integration happened, I'd already been there for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
That's when it happened.
Would you mind telling Joe what you had sent me an email recently about?
Oh, yeah. I did tell him that. I'll
High.
tell you for the camera, though. But
Yeah.
just to give you an idea of the state of affairs, when I was at Hall Fletcher, they were called the Rebels, you know, and they had a Confederate guy as the mascot. And there was actually totally segregated society here in West Asheville then. A lot of black people live on Burton Street, and for example, none of these, like this neighborhood where we're now, were integrated. There was only white people living in all the houses. It was really segregated. If you asked any of the students, including myself at Hall Fletcher, how many high schools are there in the city of Asheville, they would have said Hall Fletcher and David Miller, which were the two white high schools, but they didn't have a clue that there was a black junior high at Hill Street, and there was really very little interchange of communication between both. We were both looked down on by the other part of town because we were poor and white trash over here, and they were poor. They were looked down on even more because they were poor and black.
Yeah.
It was something that I struggled with because they really looked down on us, and I ended up playing football with a bunch of the people from David Maillard, and I ended up my last year I dated the mayor's daughter from the other side of town. It was her name was Jane Montgomery. She was a teacher, and her daddy was mayor of Asheville, Wayne Montgomery.
Okay.
And that was a pretty big deal for some guy from West Asheville because they looked down on it, you know. But it was okay because I was the co-captain of the football team.
Yeah.
And I think her parents said, look, this guy's a loser. You're going to have to dump him. So she dumped me during basketball season for a basketball player, which was kind of traumatic for me. But
So there was no part in West Asheville where blacks lived separate in this side of town?
no, that it was pretty much completely segregated.
You mentioned Burton Street.
But that's,
Yeah. Burton Street still is, I think,
but
high
that's Asheville,
concentration.
right?
Burton Street is in West Asheville.
Oh,
There is
yeah?
a street called Burton Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess that's on it, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
You know, my main contact with the black community was my parents hired a woman from the public housing over near Westgate, Isola Branch, to take care of us kids during the day, which I think ended up being a good thing for me because she was really good to us, and she would, took care of us while they were gone every day of the week almost,
Wow.
except for the weekend.
And you have one sister?
I had two sisters. The smartest one in the whole family, my sister Ty Penley, who also graduated from Asheville High, got her doctorate in textiles, but she was killed in a car wreck in 1981 or two.
Okay.
Outside of Atlanta. She was working for Kimberly Clark. I mean, she was really a rising star. She would have been the richest, and like I said, she was smarter than all of us put together, which was really one of the hardest things our family ever had to deal with, was that, My other sister, Jamie, lives here in Asheville. She has her own house. She worked for Volvo for a number of years, like computer IT stuff. She helps me take care of him, but I live here with them, so I'm here all the time,
Yeah. Well, before we go on about education, I'm just curious how it was for you growing up living in West Asheville.
Well, like I said, the fact that, because my daddy, a lot of people knew, including all the teachers knew who I was. It was hard on me.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they would have sent me to the other side of town, and even harder was going to Hall Fletcher when he was assistant principal down there. That's one of the reasons I think I became such a good football player, was I figured I got to do something to direct some other attention onto me, other than the fact that, I got to establish my own self, So,
What year did you get to Asheville High School?
what was it? 69, 70. I graduated, so it was 3 years before that.
Okay, so you went there for the whole...
The whole time. When it was
4
Lee
years of
Edwards
high
most
school.
of the time,
Yeah.
and it was segregated.
Okay.
So when but that's when they put David Maillard and Hall Fletcher together. And from a football player point of view, that was kind of traumatic, because generally you know what your position may be the next year if you're playing football in the school system.
Uh-huh.
But that threw a whole other dynamic, because then we were competing against the people we've been playing against at David Maillard, and the same dynamic happened when they moved the black students together. Our senior year in high school, when you're on the football team and you've been playing football all your years, maybe not starting but playing, you kind of got an idea where you're going to be when you're a senior.
Mm-hmm.
That same dynamic happened again. And we were really apprehensive about were we going to be able to get along. Most white people had very little contact with non-white people,
Mm-hmm.
were they going to be better football players? Should we be scared of them or not? You know.
Yeah.
And
So when they merged those two junior highs, did they merge into Hall Fletcher building?
no, that came on later. They merged the two junior highs to where he was principal at South French Broad, over at South French Broad.
Oh.
You know, it's still the middle school. That was brand new the year that
Right, but
that happened.
did I say the right schools? Didn't you just say that before you were at Asheville High, they merged David Maillard with?
No, they did.
Fletcher.
We merged when we went together. We were separate schools until we
Till you hit
both
a
sent to
certain grade?
Asheville. Lee Edwards, we were both junior highs went to Lee Edwards
Okay.
then,
Okay,
right?
okay, got it.
But those are only the
I
white
got it.
schools.
Yeah.
So
All right.
that's
Sorry.
when we were merged. He was principal at the new middle school, which they call South French, which they still call it that. It's still down there. It was entirely new school. So that was after he had done the time at for 1 year they called it South French Broad, but it was Stevens Lee.
Mhm.
And that kind of was a rough year. It was for everybody. I talked about the riot, which I personally think was a very positive thing that had ongoing impact on me in my whole life. I do anti-racist photography. I was in Charlottesville. I've infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan in Tennessee at their national convention. It's all in. I have a photo archive in NYU Library. You can see the pictures. I talked them into letting me go out to photograph the cross. They call it a cross lighting ceremony.
Lighting, yeah.
If you call it a cross burning, it upsets them. They don't like to hear that. And the way they had a national convention back then, and there was a lot of people went to that. About 1,000 people. It took over Pulaski, the whole town. Everybody that was non-white stayed home all weekend.
That's where they were founded, Pulaski.
That's
Tennessee.
exactly right. That's why they had the national convention there. And one year I went down there, and I'm gonna go photograph. I had a New York City police department issued press card, which people down, if you left New York City, were pretty impressed with that. And people in New York weren't, but so I started talking to these two old ladies that were wearing full Klan. I didn't even know there were women until I started talking, who were holding a big Confederate flag. And I asked them about the robes. I go, how do you get one of these things, Because I had no idea, and I was curious to find out. And they said, oh, you got to send in an application. Goes into the, whichever Klan, there are different ones, but this was the traditional Klan, I guess you call it. There's some untraditional ones that like Nazis, but these guys, they were the old school guys. And then once we get your application, with, I don't know, like $20 or $10 or something, and we approve it, you can order a robe, and they go, we make two kinds, cotton and polyester. And they go, well, the polyester is good because it don't wrinkle, but you got to be careful around fire. And the cotton ones, I would recommend that they're traditional, the cotton ones. So,
Oh, good.
so they thought they had a
They don't
recruit. They thought like, oh man, we're getting this one. So they go, why don't you come out to the cross thing? And it was out on some private farm 20 miles out of town. They didn't invite the press out there, but they let me go, and thinking that I was going to join, let me photograph that whole mess out there. And then I was there with another friend from New York. We got in our car. As soon as we left there, we completely left town after that. We said, we got to get away from these people, man. They're scary. That was the first time I'd ever actually seen the ceremony. There was a lot of Klan activity around here and so on and so forth. In fact, maybe it was a Klan that threatened us. Well, here's how the riot came down.
Well, let me ask you this, John.
Yeah.
When your senior year, the first year of integration at Asheville High, did a huge number of black kids come to the school? I guess I'm asking you to estimate roughly.
I can't.
How many there, and how did How did their population
Maybe
compare
about
in size?
2/3 white and 1/3 black.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
it's rough
We can-
estimate.
We can
you know.
look that up in the school board.
Yeah, a
records,
rough
but-
estimate on that.
So it was about, once it was integrated, 2/3 white, 1/3 black.
Yeah, it was integrated,
Uh,
but it really wasn't integrated. I mean, here's the deal. We started football practice a month before the school opened up. So the first to integrate at all were us, the football team, and the cheerleaders. And they brought in Clark Pennell, who was the principal, brought in an old friend of his who was a football coach from Yancey County or somewhere out in the sticks to coach football, Pee Wee Hamilton. I mean, he was a legendary Western North Carolina football player and a coach, but he hadn't been around black people or city guys. I mean, we were city guys, and he was a real country guy. And it was, I don't know why they didn't pick somebody that was already from the Asheville school system. And they had, I think, 5 coaches, and one of them was black, Gene Hammonds. And he's actually the only coach that everybody liked, you know, out of that whole team. He was a really sweet guy, and he used to dress up really sharp and drive a nice car. We were all, but he was a good guy. He's still around, I'm sure. But I don't know if he would want to be interviewed. But definitely, we all liked him, both white and black. He played a big role in that integration because he was the only coach that wasn't white that had any input onto the team. You know? So I remember clearly the first day that we went over there. It was pretty hot in the summer. We'd have 2 practices a day, one in the early morning, then we'd be off for a few hours. Then we'd go back and practice again in the afternoon. And this maybe 3 weeks or a month before the school started.
So did the football team reflect the makeup of the student body? Maybe a third of the players?
I
were
think
black?
there was more black players on the football team than made up the ratio of student body.
Right there at the start.
But some of them left right almost immediately.
Well, they didn't like Pee Wee, right?
Yeah, this is what happened. The first meeting that we had, you know, and honestly, I think Pee Wee he was not racist. He was fair with everybody, but he was a country guy, and first thing he said was, listen, you got 3 days when you come back, before you come back, and you got to get a military-style haircut. Everybody's going to have a military-style haircut. At that point, I could see some of the really, who I knew, because, you know, he went all football games, would take me to watch them play football, were some of the good best players on the whole team. We're looking at each other and talking, and it turned out they didn't come back. They went over to the basketball coach, who was a lot smarter than Pee Wee was. He goes, welcome aboard, let's start practicing. And the difference is that we broke even in the games we won and lost, you know. The basketball team went to state championships that year. You know, that it's just kind of, I like Pee Wee, and I think he was always really good to me. And he really did not show any sort of racism whatsoever. If you were the best, you got put on the team. And they were very diplomatic about it. They made a black co-captain, John Dusenberry, who I think is now a lawyer downstate around Chapel Hill, co-captain, and me, the other co-captain. And really had nothing to do with, you know, he being my daddy. It's like,
We were good.
well, I'll tell you, it really broke the ice with everybody. Dusenberry was a big guy, and he was a really good fullback, and he was not easy to tackle. And during one of the early scrimmages, my thing was defense. I was a linebacker. You know, I played defense. I ended up being the captain of the defensive team. They sent Dusenberry right up the middle, see if he was going to run over me or not, you know. And I was good at tackling big guys because I got really low, and I tackled him really good and picked him up and dumped him on the ground, and the football went flying up in the air. And people just kind of stopped. From that moment on, I was going to be the head of the, I swear, I'm sure he never forgot it, and I'm sure
You won't.
there were some parents, white parents were watching, including one who was one of Asheville's most famous athletes, David Cheadle. David Cheadle played for the Yankees. He was a superb athlete. His daddy told me later on, wow, yeah, I was really happy to see what you did that, you know. And I think that kind of just broke the ice because it said, hey, we're all in this together.
Did you guys play any other integrated schools, or were you playing against predominantly
mostly we played
100% white schools?
No, it wasn't, but mostly it was. Yeah, I mean, they got us a lot of games. We played Myers Park in South Carolina, which was integrated. We also went all the way to Wilmington and played they were a category under us, our last game. They were the state champions of that category, but we were one above them. But we went all the way down. Our last game of the season we played, they were integrated, but I think all the country schools that we played around here were not integrated when we played.
Right.
So I guess we were the first team with black players that all of them played against, you know.
You think they held their breath like, how tough are these black
Oh
guys?
no, actually Canton was integrated and they had one heck of a football player. I forgot what his name was. But he terrorized the whole everybody.
Yeah.
He was the best one in his whole area. Canton actually was integrated because they beat us pretty bad. I did pretty good right at the start. I tackled him and he fumbled the ball and we got the ball, but nobody did anything with it. And then they just turned it around and ran over us. But you know.
Did any of either of the coaches talk to you all about?
No. No, it was not discussed. I'm telling you. Even after the riot, you know, we white kids went out the back door when the riot got going. They told everybody to leave through the back door, and they announced football practice is canceled today. So we all went out the back door. We ended up going up to the Montgomery's house, a bunch of us, you know, who knew them, people from David Maillard and David Cheadle, and they had a swimming pool. We went swimming. They had the only indoor swimming pool I ever knew that anybody. You know, Mary Montgomery ended up being Asheville's most famous. She went to the Olympics. She was a swimmer. Asheville's one of their daughters. You know.
You missed the riot.
So we missed the riot, and I heard about it later. You know. None of us knew it was going to happen either. The black students were very good about organizing, and it was really whoever, you know, it was pretty much not told who the ringleaders were because people didn't know what they were going to try to do to people. Mm-hmm. But they did a good job of organizing that because right at the same time, during lunch period, all the black students got out and walked out to the front door of the building and started protesting in front of the school. And we're all going, uh-oh, what's going on now? You know, we knew something was going on, but we didn't know why. And then we got, really soon after that, got told to leave the school. You know, I found out later, you know, they sent some APD guys over there. I went to school with the police chief, Chief Hall's son, Lieutenant Hall Fletcher. He was a year older than me. And they were completely caught off guard. They tried to get people off the school property, and the kids went in the cafeteria and got chairs and started throwing it at the police. And one of the teachers' Volkswagen got set on fire. And I mean, obviously, we're all gone. It's only the black students who know what's happened, and the police and some of the teachers. But people, it didn't take very long before they figured out it was fairly serious what was going on over there.
Yeah.
And at one point, they decided they were going to march over on my daddy's school, Southridge Broad, which is, you know, not that far away. They started marching over there.
On that day?
Right after, you know, after they got done at Asheville High, they decided to go over there. And they're on the way over there, and my daddy and O.L. Sherrill, who I think was his assistant principal, to Asheville teachers, then O.L. Sherrill is known by everybody, loved by both black and white students.
I think his title was Dean of Boys.
Dean of Boys probably was. So him and my daddy and maybe somebody else went out to talk to him. They didn't want him to go over to middle school. And they talked to him, I don't know how long, but they talked him out of going over there. And at that point, the riot dispersed. Now, had they gone over there, they could have started, who knows what would have happened, even been worse. They're pretty brave, I think, to walk out there. And had my dad not been made principal of the school, the black school, he wouldn't have known anybody, but he did. And I guess they respected him, or at least enough to where they didn't march on his school. And of course, they all loved O.L. Sherrill. So that's some of the hidden history of that riot that almost nobody knows, was that they went out there on their own, you know. And so we're all going, man, what's going to happen? Because also they had half black and half white cheerleaders. They had, you know, black and white co-captain and an equal number of black and an equal number of white cheerleaders. And both the Montgomery sisters were cheerleaders. Ann, who was older, 1 year older than Jane, and Jane were both cheerleaders then. So we were up at the, you know, white cheerleader's house swimming while the riot's going on. But we're all saying, well, what's going to happen now when we go back tomorrow to football practice? You know, we're going like, is this going to carry over into what we want to do with the football team? And honestly, we went back, coaches gave us a little talk about that. He goes, look, that's this, and we're this. We're the football team. We can't help with this by playing together and not arguing with each other. We can help the situation. And that made sense to all of us, I think. And we never really even discussed it. And I know some of the people that were actually started players, black players, probably were part of organizing that, but I don't know for sure. You know, the effect of that was within 3 days, they sandblasted the name Lee Edwards, which was in rock over the entrance to the school. They sandblasted that off and put up Asheville High. They removed all the trophies from Lee Edwards, which were the only trophies. They removed them, and so there was empty cases, because we didn't have any Asheville High trophies at that point, you know. There were other things I think that they did, definitely sensitized everybody, the teachers, that this happened and we didn't even realize that they were planning to do this. And it must mean we're not really communicating. And there were black teachers that were brought over that were not communicating with these black students too well, that none of us knew they were going to do this, and they all knew about it. You know what I'm saying? I think it was really...
There was a black teacher named Miss Forney. Do you remember Miss Forney?
Was she a home ec teacher?
No, she was sociology and social studies.
I didn't have her, but I forgot what her name was. She really liked me. It was the home ec teacher. Okay. You know, she'd always make little homemade things and give me stuff to eat. I remember that.
Did you hear Miss Forney's name? The reason
yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah. I think she was popular with the black students. She had been at Stevens Lee. Had a good reputation there. Came over to Asheville High, and then she became a advocate of integration.
Yeah.
Outspoken, because not every black student and black teacher was, probably.
No, and a lot of them were somewhat conservative.
But
really,
she stood up and said, "We're going to make this work." That's what we understand.
Well, that year I had only one black teacher. Okay. That was the home ec teacher.
Yeah.
The rest of them were white teachers, even with the integration.
When you say a lot of the black students and faculty were conservative, what do you mean by that?
Christian values and just, I mean, I'm not saying everybody was for integration that was teaching over there at that point in time. I definitely know that lots of the parents, the white parents of the football team, didn't like it. And I'll tell you one prime example when it really got brought home to me was there was one black player from West Asheville who we knew, Stanley McIntosh. He was the only one actually that we knew from West Asheville. And I think I can't remember how we knew. He might have gone to Hall Fletcher at one point, but at any rate, one of the player's mom would pick us up after football practice and give us all a ride in the car back to West Asheville. And 2 days after the riot, he got a ride with her back to West Asheville. And he's sitting in the back seat with two of us, and then her son's up in front. She forgot he was in the car. And she made a comment, she goes, they want to put white and black kids together in the cosmetology. They had a special thing for cosmetology. And I wouldn't put my hands in their hair. I wouldn't touch them. And we're all going in the back seat. Does she realize that he's sitting back here? And we were just in shock, And none of us really knew what to say. When he got out, we all got out together. And he just took off and he didn't say nothing. That was the last time he tried to ride home with us. That kind of brings it back, Probably a lot of them are still raised. I don't know. They all think I'm so radical, they all took me off their Facebook pages at this point. I mean, at one point, one of my old friends started, when Facebook started up, hooked me up with all these old people, white kids that I went to Asheville High School with. Nah, they're all gone now.
Zoe and I both do some Facebook. It can be vicious, and it was terrible during this last election. But that's another story.
Yeah, believe me, I know a lot about it. I do a lot of organizing with Facebook. But let me just go into the history of my mom and my dad.
Okay, great.
Well, when I'm at Hall Fletcher, my dad is, like I say, assistant principal, and he got made that because he went to school there when the superintendent, Woodrow P. Griffin, whose actually son went to Hall Fletcher with me at the same time. You might want to try to interview Woody Griffin Jr. He is still alive. He lives in West Asheville. Both, his dad's dead, but he might be somebody you want to talk to about it. And my mom is, working for the superintendent of schools. And Hall Fletcher is a pretty rough school. I mean, like I said, we were white trash. We were poor white trash. And there was a lot of fighting and just craziness that went on down there. And I was really, wished they'd never sent me to that school. It was very hard being his kid and going to school there. And people took shots at me on the football when I was like a young, my first time I went to play organized football. Some of these big guys who were, been there for a few years were really taking it out on me. And other people tried to take it out on me, I'm telling you. But at some point that all changed, and they kind of left me alone. They used to call him Porky down there, Porky Penley. And I was Porky Jr. And I hated that, I really hated that. But what's ironic is he went to school there himself. He ended up being assistant principal there. My mom, after she graduated, ended up teaching there for 20 years. So we all both my sisters went to Hall Fletcher. We got a real history with Hall Fletcher. Like I say, it was called the Rebels, and nobody even thought that was a bad thing to call it at that point in time. We all grew up and got educated, and I say that riot was a pivotal moment in educating and changing our lives in somewhat. I mean, it definitely changed mine. It took me a while to figure it all out,
Now, what did you learn from the riot? What was it that changed you?
Well, I learned, for one thing, if you have the courage to stand up for what you believe in, and you're willing to take the risk and do that, you can make changes. That was clearly demonstrated by that. And that I don't know a lot about black community. I don't, this is within days after that we started thinking about that stuff. Main thing we were thinking about was, can we get along and play football together? The rest of it we were, we were not thinking about. We wanted to be a good football team. Just the whole issue. I mean, the civil rights stuff is breaking out all around, and this is the first real action of protest in Asheville that really was serious action about integration, civil rights, discrimination, and it focused right there in the school. And but did we get to know each other that well? No, we didn't. The athletes that year did, and the cheerleaders, because we were together a lot. You go to the cafeteria during lunchtime, completely segregated tables. There was not a lot of interaction or communication, except with the athletes. So that just, unfortunately, it's too bad we didn't grow up going to school together, because then we would have been friends and known each other, and
Right.
who knows what. But because of the way it was, there wasn't enough time, and people were kind of scared of each other, and there was, like I said, the civil rights movement was blasting, and all that was going on. I never heard, because back then I was up at the Montgomery house a lot. Mayor never said anything about it, But like I said, they were real smart. They didn't arrest anybody, and they didn't press charges on anybody. If that happened back now, who knows what they would have been arrested for and charged with serious crimes. They just decided the best way to deal with this, and I think between the police department and the city and their school system, it was extremely smart what they did. They said, we're just going to go on. We know this happened. We're actually going to meet their demands, because their demands make a lot of sense. We should have thought about this beforehand. And hopefully we're not going to have any more trouble and things are going to settle down. And that's what they did. Had they arrested people and put them on trial and charged, it would have turned into a national news story at that point. They handled it surprisingly good, and I know he had input into how it got handled. And so that's, I got to give the school system and the whole police department and everybody else, because they could have, just for assaulting the police officers, brought people up and burning that Volkswagen and all that. They handled it really good, which probably wouldn't happen so well now.
Right.
John, would you say on the spot when the police first came to the campus, let's say?
We were gone. Like I say, we ran out that back door and got the heck out of there, because we were all scared. We didn't know what was going on.
From what
I heard from people that they came out and tried to get people out of the front of the school off the property, and then people went into the cafeteria and got chairs and started throwing the chairs at the cop, and the cops retreated back into the school.
The story that the Citizen Times ran said that the police showed up in riot gear and were expecting the worst, and the fact that this is what the paper said, and the fact
they didn't even have riot gear back then.
Well, that's what they
I'm saying, but don't believe everything.
I was also thinking of that when Robert Ball had his photos up, the student, and they showed the policemen, and they were in white. They weren't in gear.
No, they weren't. They didn't even have riot gear back then. I don't think. They might have bought some after Asheville High. But, they just showed up. They just put out a call, and I guess whoever cops were on duty went over to the school.
So from what you remember, it was not an invasion of the campus by police. 6
or 7 police. It wasn't a lot, because they didn't really, I think, have any idea what they just thought. Oh, we're going to go over and get these kids off the front of the lawn, and that's going to be it. They're going to see us police officers. They're going to immediately do what we tell them. Didn't work out that way for them.
I am surprised that you only had one black teacher.
I mean, there were other black teachers, but out of all that year, only one, and she was the home ec teacher. I think the ratio of teachers, it's hard to tell. I can't remember how many, but like I said, it wasn't. I think a lot of those teachers went over to his school. Went over to the middle school. I'm pretty sure there was a lot more black teachers and black administrators, running the school. At South French Broad than there was at Asheville High that year.
Joe and I have been wondering if there was not only black flight but white flight.
Yeah, that happened. People went out to the country. Yeah, that definitely happened. A lot of white people move out to the country schools right after that. They go, we're time for us to move out and put our kids in the country, or maybe mostly not to private schools, because if parents had the money and the inclination to go to the private schools around here, they were already there.
They would have been there.
They were already there, but there was a white flight to the county, and the county welcomed it because they got more money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it brought in extra people with money to fund the school system. So yeah, they did like that. I'm pretty sure, you know, and I think it was a few years after us that they integrated the county schools. I'm not sure exactly when that happened,
Yeah, I didn't see
but
anything
it
about
wouldn't
that.
have been the ratio of students because there wasn't all that many black people that lived out in the
Mhm.
county
That's right.
back in those days, you know. So, but let me talk about my mom a little bit because
Okay.
I'm really proud of her. You know, he got to where he was partially because of my mom.
Mhm.
I mean, my mom worked as a secretary at UNCA and helped put him through school,
Mm.
and took care of us mostly. And then she got the job working as a secretary for the superintendent up at the, you know, the office, main office. And she did that for a really long time. Like I say, she started going back to school when my first year at Asheville High, at night classes at UNCA. And she only took off one whole semester, their last semester, where she wasn't working and going to school and taking care of us at the same time, to just concentrate on her schoolwork. And she got magna cum laude, she got graduated with honors. I got to tell you, you know, my family pretty smart. Although he's my stepfather, I didn't inherit whatever I got from him, but from my mom, I did. You know, and so then she started at Hall Fletcher, and she taught 20 years at Hall Fletcher. You know, I mean,
And what was her subject?
math.
Math.
Both of them were
Math,
math
that's right.
teachers.
That's
I
right.
mean, you know, like I said, he used to get so frustrated with me. He couldn't help me with my math. He would just get angry and start yelling at me. You know, he really was. He didn't have a lot of patience with me. I only really spent a lot of time with my daddy mostly because he was mostly gone. He would get home, you know, pretty late at night from either coaching or whatever else he was doing to make extra money. And so, you know, we had a fairly much of an adversarial relationship my whole life, you know, for a number of, like I say, one, he was my stepfather, and two, his role in the school system where I ended up having to go to it, you know. I kind of try to live down the fact that who he is and who I am. I didn't really want either, but that's what happened because the football players knew him, and I guess they didn't know hardly anybody else white in the school system when we came together. So at least they knew who my dad was, and I guess they were all looking at me to see whether I was what I was gonna do or how, you know, because they did have some recognition of him and who I was, you know. And I shocked them, man, when I made that tackle. I'll never forget that day. I'm
Great
telling you,
story.
I don't even know, but I do know that every position was open up until, and I got the feeling right after I made that tackle that I was going to be running the defensive team because, like I said, everybody watched that and kind of it loosened it up. I mean, you know, I don't think he ever held it against me. A couple of times he ran right over the top of me, but that one day I got him down pretty good, you know.
Did you say that your mother grew up in Weaverville? Did I miss
My
that?
mother grew up all over Western North Carolina because my daddy was, her granddaddy, her father was a minister, and they got moved around a lot. She was in Waynesville, Maggie Valley. My granddaddy was responsible, there's a stone church you can see from the highway. It's built out of stone. I don't know if it's still there or
Where?
in Maggie Valley.
Oh, okay.
He's responsible for building that church. While he was there, it was just pretty much a ramshackle kind of a church, and they hauled stone out of the mountains and built that. He built that church, you know. I mean, when he retired, he was the oldest active minister with the Methodist Church in Western North Carolina, and my grandmother was, like I say, going to
Gaston.
Gaston County and teaching. And sometimes, you know, when I was a kid, I'd go down there with her and spend the week, and she'd take me to school with her. And I'd say, you know, she really educated me as a kid a lot. I was her pet. I mean, she, you know, for whatever reason, I guess I was the first one and I was a boy, but my grandma loved me to death. My granddaddy was kind of distant, but he taught me gardening. He always, you know, they lived through the Depression. They always had a big, big garden. They didn't get paid much either. I mean, honestly. I mean, that's the sadness about some of this is that when my parents retired, I don't know what they got. My sister handles the finances, but, you know, they never got paid anywhere near the rest of the country, or probably in other parts of the state what, you know, teachers got paid here back then, which is obviously why he had to work all them extra jobs to support us, you know. I mean, but
My mother was a teacher, and I taught in the late 60s and early 70s myself. I'm 4 years ahead of you. I was class of 65.
okay.
And you're class of...
Well, did you know Walter Robinson?
No, I'll tell you, I did not grow up in Asheville.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in
Yeah.
the Atlanta area, out of DeKalb County.
Yeah, well, he's somebody I suggested you try to contact. He's on Facebook.
Walter Robinson?
Walter Robinson. He was a year ahead of us, or the year, I can't remember. But he's well known in the community because he became an Asheville City police officer for a number of years. After the riot, I think. I think they might have taken out some black police after the riot. They figured, we got to have somebody to talk to these. If they riot again, we need some black faces out there. I don't know exactly, but I'm saying that might have been some of the more of the fallout from the Asheville High riot. They decided they needed a couple black police officers on the force. I'm not sure. As far as I know, it was all white at that point. You know, when the riot happened, I'm pretty sure it was.
Sure, it was mostly.
So I don't know if you have any questions. I'm kind of, you know.
Yeah, it's great everything you've said.
Oh, it's very, very enlightening, very helpful. Thank you.
Well, you know, somebody else I mentioned you might want to talk to is Dan Pierce, whose mom was, you know, taught with my mom down at Fletcher, Archie Pierce.
Is that Pierce?
P-I-E-R-C-E. He's, you know, big wig in the history department. He's written some books about moonshining and other stuff. He was a year younger or 2 years younger than me. His brother played football on that team, Johnny Pierce, Archie's son. So he was one of the players on that team. And me and him were kind of best friends all the way from Fletcher through that.
Wow.
His dad was the minister at the West Asheville Baptist Church out here across from Ingalls. I think that church for many years. You know.
Did you stay here in Asheville after you graduated from high school?
No, no, I didn't. I went to me and a bunch of the football players, white guys, David Cheadle, Wayne Carter, and who else? Michael Oxenrider, who was a year younger than us. Did play football, but he was our good friend. His daddy owned the Tasty Freeze out here on, you know, whatever, Patton Avenue. We became hippies and stayed in my granddaddy. My grandma had died. My granddaddy was in a nursing home and stayed in this house out in Weaverville. We were the first area hippies that really got notorious.
That's wild.
And we were already kind of notorious from Asheville High football. In fact, Wayne Carter, who's still alive, has some of the game films of that team. You know, they took films of the football games, even back then. And somehow Carter ended up with a bunch of our actual team films. He still got them, I'm sure. Wayne Carter. But so we got word that the county sheriff's department was taking a hard look at our house out there. And we all decided it was about time for us to leave. And at that point, David Cheadle got signed by the New York Yankees, and he suddenly became rich. He got $100,000, which back then to sign. So he was on his way gone. He didn't want to, you know, get in trouble. Right, he ended up getting in trouble later, but at that point, So he's all of a sudden he's rich. He's driving a brand new car, and
y'all were still hippies.
well, kind of hippies. But me and Mike decided. Well, my number was up for the draft. They did a lottery, and you could tell on what your birthday was whether you were going to probably get drafted or not. Mine came up, and I was going to get drafted, and I didn't want to go in the Army, so I enlisted in the Navy. And so did Mike Oxenrider, enlisted in the Navy, and I mean not the Navy, the Air Force. And Carter went back to Asheville, and I'm not sure, he played a lot of country music and stuff. The Cheadle family, they still got the sign shop up here on Haywood Road. Their daddy started that Dave Cheadle sign. He's actually one of the parents that was up there watching the practice that came up and really thanked me for tackling that guy, David's daddy.
I'm glad you thought to do that.
He was happy about that. So that's kind of what happened. We went to service. David went to the Yankees, and this was our main core, except for a few other really ones that were tight over at Asheville from the football team, basically. And so I became air traffic. Navy made me an air traffic controller, and sent me to Crete and Naples, Italy during the Cold War. I controlled planes with nuclear weapons. That's caused a big. That and Asheville, different things in my life like that have really caused the direction of my life to go in certain ways. I was just quoted in the New York Daily News recently about organizing a protest about Trump's military parade, which he canceled, which I already have a permit for a Veterans and Friends Against War and Nuclear Weapons protest at McPherson Square in Washington over that weekend. And my quote was that, they say they canceled it because the cost of the parade went up so much. But I say they cancel it because they have intel on how many different groups have applied for protest permits, including veterans groups. And they're planning on going to Washington to protest against Trump's military parade. And the fact is that part of the estimate in the, upping the amount of that cost is because they're gonna have to handle all these protesters coming in to protest the parade. So that that was just a week or two ago in the Daily News. I got quoted because I used to work for the guy. I know people in the media in New York. I worked with them. My photos were in every major publication in the city. I used to do regular work for the New York Times, spot news for Daily News to post to everybody. My archives in NYU Library now. People want to look at it.
I was going to ask you if you're taking photos here.
Yeah, actually I've had, you probably didn't look at them because I sent you so many of them, a lot of stuff published in Mountain Express.
Okay.
Yeah,
from here.
We have looked at that. Sure have.
But when Jake Frankel left Mountain Express, the new person wasn't all that interested in dealing with me, so that stopped. But when Jake Frankel was running,
I don't know that name.
He runs that. I have one of those other alternative Asheville papers. There's some small papers that I think are pretty much online.
Asheville Blade.
I think that's the one. I think he's running that now. But it's not anywhere near where he was when he had the Mountain Express. But yes, I photographed the. It's a funny story. Stuff still keeps going on. Like I photographed the Michael Brown rally about Michael Brown here in Asheville, which was kind of militant, And some of the local anarchists showed up with an anti-police banner, with a big, anarchy circle on the banner. Something about we don't need you stinking cops in Asheville, or I don't know, something like that, right? So some of the older ladies who are part of the peace movement and are social do-gooders in the progressive movement in Asheville asked me to not let them publish any of those photos. Mountain Express, they knew Mountain Express was going to publish my photos, to not send those photos over to Mountain Express. And I go, look, I'm not a censor. I was there. I documented this. This is what happened, and I'm not going to voluntarily take any of these. You might not like them, but they were there, So I sent them over, and they published the photos, and they really went bananas. They went to the black ministers, and they had the black ministers and them saying, we're denouncing those people when we have our, church march. We're not letting them march with any of those banners. I mean, it's just kind of the same things that go on, but so they all block me on Facebook too. But I'm not a censor,
got any friends left?
In fact, I kind of was happy they showed up with those. They were very interesting banners that they
We'd be
had.
glad to be your archive of any Asheville photos.
Well,
We
I
don't get
wanted
out
to
to-
tell you that besides the Asheville photos, if you look on my Facebook albums, I have an incredible collection of stuff. I mean, I was at the inauguration. I photographed the riot at the inauguration. I went to both the conventions before. I went to all the rallies for Chelsea Manning. In those archives, which they don't want at NYU. They already got so much they don't know what to do with it now. That is for, I'm willing to sign. And stuff like, like I think I told you, my photo of Keith Haring has been in museums all over Europe. That's in the other archive.
That was incredible.
I've got every radical noted name, including Cornel West, Chris Hedges, Medea Benjamin of Code Pink, Colonel Ann Wright, who's known in the anti-war movement as one of the main spokesperson, Ramsey Clark, who was former Attorney General. All of this is in there. It's stuff that I've covered. If you look on it, it's quite a history of just stuff on my Facebook. It's up there.
Yeah.
It ain't going anywhere. It's going to stay up there. And I'd be more than happy if the public library not only wanted to get the Asheville stuff. I did, when the governor came up here over the bathroom when he came up to his country house.
You went to that?
I photographed that for Mountain Express.
Wow.
I've been living in East Village in New York. A large part of my photos in my archive are of ACT UP in New York, which was the rebellion against what was going on about AIDS, but it also changed. One of my friends was one of the original people at the Stonewall riots, actually at the riot.
Wow.
So I've had kind of a long history in that neighborhood. And so my views on a lot of things,
Yeah.
I'm considered to be fairly radical by a lot of people in the whole country, including the government. I did a year in federal prison for protesting nuclear weapons at the Savannah River nuclear weapons plant.
A year?
A year. So that was an experience. I just wrote something about that because of the prison strike going on now. Posted on my Facebook about my memory of some of that time, which was really hard. Most of it was in county jail in Columbia, South Carolina, with no air conditioning and 30 prisoners cell. During the day we stayed in the same area. We all slept in that area in 6-person pods. Got 1 hour a week outside for recreation. And most of the people there were angry black men. And I did a month in solitary in Atlanta. They were bringing me back to South Carolina because I just took off. My sister got killed. We had just been convicted for violating the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 at the Savannah River nuclear bomb plant. And I just lost it after that happened. And I said, I took off. I became a federal fugitive. They caught me in Nicaragua. The Nicaraguans caught me because I was there photographing the war, actually, for a nationally known paper called The Guardian, which is not the British Guardian, but it was a national radical newspaper back in those days. And I had an expired passport. I got arrested by the Sandinistas, locked up for a month. Then they gave me a choice to join the Sandinista army or come back. I'd have to renounce my U.S. citizenship. I go, look, I already been in the military. If I join your army, they just killed this American guy for building a dam a week ago. How long do you think I'm going to last? I said, I'm going back to Miami. So they arrested Miami in Miami, and were taking me back, taking their time getting me back to South Carolina, because the federal judge, who was chief federal judge in South Carolina, hated my guts because I represented myself at our trial. And I got Philip Berrigan, who you may have heard about, legendary anti-war Catholic.
That's Daniel's
brother.
Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
Daniel and Philip were the people that broke into the draft board, burned the draft board files during the Vietnam War, to come testify at my trial in South Carolina. And he started what they call plowshares, which is Catholics that break into nuclear weapons plants, and they don't do it so much. But the most recent was two old elderly nuns went onto the property down in Tennessee at the what they call it. Yeah, I'm getting dementia like he is, but at any rate, they trespassed.
In the Chattanooga area.
Yeah, they TVA or whatever it is, but where they do the nuclear weapons stuff, they protest. They just trespassed, went through all the security barriers, and spray painted something about peace on the wall, and sat there to get arrested. Coming back, okay. So what they did, and what Berrigan, the brother stayed a priest. Berrigan left the church and married a radical Catholic nun. And
How do you do that?
what? Yeah, she left the church too. They got married and they had some really fine kids who are anti-war. But they started the whole movement that they felt that as Christians it was their obligation to try and stop the production of weapons of mass. And by stopping it, I mean they went into a Westinghouse, broke into a Westinghouse nuclear weapons warhead guidance, and destroyed some of the nose cones. They used a rubber raft to get into the nuclear sub base up in Groton, Connecticut, and they spray painted USS Auschwitz on one of the subs. And they never tried to get away. They would do it, whatever they were going to do. Sit around and pray and wait to be arrested. They would do time in federal prison. So he came down and testified at my trial. And he had an extremely well articulated argument that anybody that was protecting or involved in the production of weapons of mass destruction was just as guilty as the Nazis were under the Nuremberg war crime. And he gave an international legal argument.
Yeah,
which
but that judge didn't get much.
Oh man, he wrote me down the questions to ask him the day before I cross-examined him in federal. So I didn't even realize exactly what was going on. It didn't hit me until I'm about halfway through, and I'm looking at him, and the judge removed all the jury. They never even got to hear his testimony, right? The judge is going to hear it. It's going on the record. Then he decided whether it's relevant to the charges of trespassing under the Atomic Energy Act of 1950. We tried to go into the administration of the building. They were ready for us. We didn't get any. They had painted a yellow line down the lawn, and we walked over the line, and 6 of us, Savannah River Plant 6. But I can see that judge. He's looking like one of those cartoon figures where they start getting redder and redder, and the whole top blows out. That's what happened with him. And I go, oh my God. Philip Berrigan just really like,
He just sent me to
oh
prison.
man. So that judge had it in for me, which is another reason I jumped by. Once he got me back, though, he was really happy to see me again. Because by that point, by the time they actually got me up in front of him, I'd already been in jail for about 7.5 months, from Miami to Atlanta to that county jail in Columbia. And while I was there, I wrote a letter to the Columbia newspaper about how bad the conditions were in the jail. They published a letter. The next day, these federal marshals came over and took me out to another jail, which actually was a lot better. It was from there I went from Richland County to Lexington County. In Lexington County, the guy goes, you ain't got that much time. You got a month and a half to go. I'm going to put you in charge of the laundry. So you're going to run the laundry. And you get your own room. and we'll pay you like 23 cents an hour to do it. You know, so I ended up being the laundry guy for my last time.
Laundry.
But I liked him. He was good to me, you know, that sheriff. But the whole other time in Columbia was pure hell. I mean, it was really bad. And they got me out. And I said I should have wrote that letter to the state a long time ago. If I'd have known that they were going to get me out of here, I would have wrote that letter when I first got there. Unfortunately, it took me 6 months before I really got motivated enough to think and thought about writing that letter.
Oh gosh.
Well, John, you have lived quite a life.
That's true. I'm trying to convince somebody to write a book about it. I'm not a great writer. I am a great talker, and that's why I didn't become a regular journalist and got into photos.
So we're going to catch up
All right.
here on something we missed.
Yes, I just want to talk about the repercussions after the riot on my family. Some people created some signs that said James Penley is an in-lover, and I will never use that word. I don't use it. I don't care what people want to use it. I won't say it. And put a homemade sign on the front door of our house, and there was one posted up on Haywood Road on a telephone pole. And we got death threats on the telephone, anonymous threats. And at one point, someone broke in my dad's office in the middle of the night over Southridge Broad and poured lighter fluid over his desk and set it on fire. And at that point, the Asheville Police Department had patrol cars coming by our house on a regular basis, and my dad, he had a pistol, but he wouldn't carry it. He kept it at the house. Started carrying a pistol when he went to school, and he continued to do that. Also, he a lot of times would take money from the cafeteria once a week over to the bank, or he had large amounts of school money for deposit at the bank and stuff. So, you know, he had the gun for those reasons, but he also had the gun because we didn't have any idea who was making the threats, how serious it was. We thought the setting his office on fire was a pretty big, like, direct threat to him and us, and that did affect our whole family. And they never wanted to talk about it much with us. They kind of wanted to protect us from it. Some of the stuff I didn't know until later. I learned about from my sister, who told me about it. Like I said, I was just busy running around, and I wasn't wanted to have a good time my last year at Asheville High before, because all of us were afraid, you know, after we graduated from Asheville High, where's our next stop? Vietnam.
Yeah.
One of the first people that I knew, one of my friend's older brothers, was the first actual, you know, person that actually died of anything in the city of Asheville. He died in Vietnam. And so that whole time we were in high school, all of us, black, white, everybody, was looking at the possibility that, you know, we might be dead from Vietnam, that some of us were going to go there when we got out of high school. So I think that affected the way we lived our lives back then.
Right.
And we were pretty wild our senior year of high school. I mean, I don't even want to go into some of the crazy stuff we did, but it involved a lot of heavy drinking. Yeah, it did.
Well, John, can you make a direct tie the way white neighbors would have perceived the connection between your father and what was happening with the...
Sure. Like I say, there were a lot of white parents that were not all that happy about integration.
Okay.
And I think that there may have been some of the people that were part of the riot but weren't students. You know, they said they were outside agitators.
Outsiders, right.
But I think they were older people from Asheville who had gone other places and gotten the civil rights movement and came back here at some point, you know, for organizing. I don't know for sure. They never, like I said, some of it would, which they always do when kind of stuff like this happens, outside agitators were the ones that started all this.
And you know,
But
the
They
whole
didn't make themselves known.
It wasn't true, man. Them kids over at Asheville High figured out all this by themselves, really organized it, didn't let anybody know about it, and they did it.
and the whole climate in the country then, because I was very aware of things.
It's
And
like it is now, only worse, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Every group with a cause wanted to protest.
Yeah.
And they wanted a demonstration. And they wanted to get the media attention.
And it was serious in North Carolina. They had the lunch counter, but then they had a shooting in Greensboro.
Yeah.
Where anti-Klan protesters were shot down in the street in Greensboro.
Yeah.
I was working with a student group at UNC at that time in Chapel Hill. We were going over there that day. We were headed over there. We heard it on the radio and we didn't go. We turned around and went back to Chapel Hill. Within 2 weeks, we had some of the survivors from that shooting, from the anti-Klan protest group. One of them, whose husband was killed there, come over to UNC and talk to the students. Not a lot of students went to hear him, but they had 1,000 state troopers surrounding the auditorium on the UNC campus. But see, that's something that happened.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I got a whole long time way back. I've been following and doing exposing of the Loyal White Knights, which is the North Carolina branch of the Klan, who are absolutely, completely, total criminal nutcases. They're the ones that organized the protest when they took down the Confederate flag at the State House in Columbia. And you can see, I have photos on that of not only that, they had the new Black Panthers in the front of the State House. They had the Klan. They have their rally in the back of the State House. So it was just like the difference between night and day. You walked around the front of it. You can see the pictures on my Facebook. It's the new Black Panthers who are relatively militant, you know, and then the Klan's in the back door, and they get escorted in by the police. First thing that happens is somebody out of the crowd threw a 40-ounce beer bottle and hit the head Klan guy right in the head, right as they're going into their free speech zone, and knocked him out. I couldn't get pictures because I couldn't get in there to take them, but the black state patrolman whose picture had been taken, taking the flag down, went all over the country. Really, well-built black officer in the state police, like a very big man, picked the Klan guy up and carries him to the ambulance. So that was one of the first images that got, and I was kicking myself because I couldn't get close enough. It was already happened. But, I have photos of the protest about taking the flag down, and like I say, the Klan from North Carolina is the one that organized that protest down there. They were up in Charlottesville. That's the one. If you look on my Facebook, the Klan rally, which happened before the Unite the Right rally, they organized that, the North Carolina Klan. They're really well known. At one point, me and someone I knew, his sister from New York, his name was Monroe Gilmore. At a certain point in time, he was all over the newspapers here in Asheville.
We have his collection.
You have his collection?
You do?
Yeah.
Well, me and him were friends because his sister Jenna, I knew her from New York, and I didn't meet a lot of people that, had either connection with Asheville or North Carolina. And at one point, we exposed this lawyer, Kirk Lyons, who you might have heard about.
Yeah, in Black Mountain.
He was a lawyer for the Klan and the Aryan Nations. I mean, he was a serious activist with that Aryan Nations. And those people were like armed paramilitary stuff, shooting at, robbing banks and stuff. They had planned to set up a big enclave. That's why he moved out to Black Mountain. He was living outside of Black Mountain. And he's just portraying himself as, I am a lawyer for these people, but I'm a civil rights lawyer. And me and Monroe did a lot to expose him intentionally, we thought, trying to set up one of the, they were setting up compounds where encouraging people that believe like them. They had a famous one out in, was it Utah or something? It was a really notorious Aryan Nations compound. We thought he was trying to set that up, similar thing here. And we got all over the place. And Monroe was pretty brave to be doing that because he didn't live more than 2 miles away from Lyons. But we helped get stuff out about him. Me, I had anti-racist Klan connections around the country, and I let people know, and he did local stuff here. so on and so
He's
forth.
done great work. The first collection he gave us was when they worked desegregate Biltmore Forest Country Club.
Yeah, I had forgotten that, but yeah, I knew him. Yeah, I know all about that.
And one of them was his collection working to get, I think, Irwin High School's mascot changed. He's a great guy.
Yeah, you know, I've completely lost track of him. He isn't doing activism. Maybe he is, but I never seen him at any of the Asheville protests in years.
Huh. I've had his email. Yeah, I'm not sure what he's doing.
Well, he had a bunch of kids.
He still has a newsletter going for his group.
He does. I don't know. Like I say, I lost track of him
I'll
because
tell him that
over the years
I got to talk with you and
that I mentioned him.
yeah. Okay.